Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. Such a pleasure today to be here with Laura Knight, owner of downtown iconic Santa Barbara restaurant Pascucci. And I want to talk to you, Laura, about everything going on with State Street and outdoor dining and State Street master plan and so much of what people are talking about in terms of what downtown's going to look like for the next 100 years, if we can believe that. But Laura, first, how are you doing today? As we record this, it's a Saturday, and I know you're going to have a busy day today. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. You were one of the early ones too. We did it when I was just audio, and we appreciate that. Let's dive right in and talk about what's happening. You have a very successful restaurant, been around 30 years. It's successful because of all the work you put into it. And we're in this moment of time right now where we're trying to decide as a city, as a community, what State Street is going to look like coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Several blocks have been closed to vehicles, cars. And so there's all these competing interests about what State Street's going to look like. And there you are at the 500 block in the heart of it. And I kind of want to just check in with you from your perspective as a restaurant owner, amid all of these conversations about what State Street is going to look like and the parklets and the future and parades and bicycles and pedestrians and cars. How are things going from your perspective as a local restaurant owner?
Things are going well. I think it's been determined that people do like dining outside. When COVID hit, the city was kind of forced to do something, and they made a big decision to have State Street be closed to car traffic and have restaurants move their tables outside into the street. So we could have a few tables out there and no tables inside due to COVID. And I think they were pleasantly surprised how much people liked it and still like it. Kind of a European feel, watching people go by. As you know, they've hired a consulting firm to try to figure out the future of it and get a look that's not so hodgepodge and people doing their own thing. They've got certain colors they want. They've got some furniture guidelines, some lighting guidelines. They're just trying to kind of pull it all together and have it look nicer, which is completely understandable. I think all the bars and restaurants were very appreciative that the city let them do this. And I think, I'm hoping it'll stay. I think it makes sense that they want to work things out. I know there's some issues with the bikes and the e-bikes, and I think they're just trying to work through that. Lots of groups are meeting, lots of conversations are happening. Downtown Santa Barbara has formed a bar and restaurant committee that meets monthly to discuss all these things, just so that we know what's coming down the pipes and what the city is going to require of us. And there have been a lot of hoops to jump through and making sure everything's ADA compliant. That's important. We all have to have a ramp that a wheelchair can get to a table outside. And, it's just a process we're having to go through.
So I cover a lot of these government meetings where you have a lot of planning staff, you have elected officials, and obviously restaurant owners will speak. You have a lot of critics of the way State Street looks talking. We don't hear as often from an actual restaurant owner publicly at these meetings. So I kind of want to give you a little bit of space here. Are you making money hand over fist in this economy? Are you struggling? How important is it that the city figures this out for a restaurant such as you? Talk a little bit about your experience just owning your restaurant.
Well, I think what's going on right now with the economy, there's been so much going on. We're coming out of COVID. COVID was challenging for many, many reasons. It was just sort of something nobody saw coming, and you just weathered the storm. The economy's tightening right now. People are concerned about their budgets. They're concerned about the stock market. They're concerned about a lot of things, the debt ceiling. And I think everyone's just kind of tightening their belt. They're not dining out as much. So I don't know if a lot of restaurants are making money hand over fist right now. I think it's just kind of survival of the fittest. It's sad to see restaurants that have been open a long time not making it, like fresco, as you'd mentioned.
Yeah.
And it's just the thing too is that we operate on a very small profit margin. Most people know that, you strive for a 10% profit margin. So when you have some slow months and basically 2 months of rain and very few customers, we're not just not making money, we're losing money because, you have to pay your staff, you have to pay your rent, you've got to pay your utilities, you have fixed costs that don't go away. So, you've got to make up for that when things get better. And the hotels have seen a drop in business the first quarter. I'm on a board called Hospitality Santa Barbara. We merged with the Chamber of Commerce a few years ago.
Mhm.
We meet monthly via Zoom, and the hotels had a really challenging first quarter. We didn't get very many tourists here. We get quite a few tourists from Los Angeles coming up for the weekend, and they had the same storms we had. So pretty much if you lived in LA and you saw on your weather that it was going to be 5 days of rain, you wouldn't get in your car and drive to Santa Barbara to sit in a hotel. So that really challenged all of hospitality January, February into March. And things are better in April. We've got summer coming up, Father's Day, graduations, solstice. So I think everyone's optimistic it's going to be a good summer.
Yeah. What message do you want city leaders to get when it comes to what the future should look like? The emergency ordinance to allow the outdoor dining, I believe, ends this year in December. So they'll have to decide whether to extend that. We know that the State Street Master Plan process is a years long effort, right? It's not going to happen overnight. And we know that they just recently got over this debate about how much to charge for outdoor seating. What message do you want them to receive when it comes to how they can best accommodate and facilitate successful restaurants downtown?
I think we all need to remember that we're not going to make 100% of the population of Santa Barbara happy. And I think we have to just do our best to do what we can that helps businesses. I mean, small business is the backbone of our town. And it's really important for people to support local business. It's important for the city leaders to listen to what the businesses need. They sent out a poll to residents in Santa Barbara, and 86% of them liked State Street being closed to car traffic. So the 14% don't, and those people are speaking up. But for the most part, people like to be outside. They like the feeling. They like the people watching, the fresh air. It's been very well received, and I think they need to do the best they can to keep it. The parklets, yes, need some work, but I think they just kind of need to look at the big picture and let the groups that are meeting have their meetings, talk, present things, and get feedback, and then go from there. I think, one meeting that was really tumultuous and argumentative, I think they just kind of need to look at that like, well, people are speaking out, they have different views. Let's let this settle. Let's see where it goes. Let's let the consulting firm do what they were hired to do. And I like the fact that they're giving 3 options, not just one. They're not coming in and saying, this is what you should do. They're saying, here are some ideas. Do you want to take components of all 3? But, let the firm, they've got an excellent reputation. I did hear early on many people saying that they did some research and that this firm, MIG, is really good at what they do. And hopefully they're the right fit for Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I know they get a lot of contracts, so they do have a good reputation. This will be the hardest question I ask you because this is what I hear critics say, which is before the pandemic, you had a fixed number of seats, spots, inside a restaurant, some sidewalk dining. And now, pandemic is over for the most part, and you've got extra seats out in the public space, and so there's this thinking of why should restaurants be able to have so much extra seating out in the public right away where somebody wants to enjoy that space too, and I guess doesn't want to see a parklet. Can you just answer that or talk a little bit about that? I'm sure you've heard that criticism is Well, why do restaurants deserve all this outdoor, not free, but all this frontage that other businesses aren't don't get if they're not on State Street?
Well, first off, we don't have a lot of extra seating out there. We have currently 2 tables on the street. We've got 2 more being made that will fit out there.
Hmm.
The extra 2 we had out on the street, we moved inside because the city changed the all the regulations of everything. We used to have a bigger footprint out on the street, and state law required a 20-foot path down the middle of the street versus 14. So
Yeah.
everybody's parklet shrank. People had to lose some tables. So we don't have that much more seating. In the beginning, we had our tables very far apart because the health department had guidelines. We could only have 25% occupancy. Then they raised it to 50. Now we can have tables wherever. So it's really balanced out for us. And there are some parklets that have a lot more seating. There are restaurants that have quite a bit more because they're in front of other businesses that have allowed and been okay with them doing that.
Yeah.
We're not one of those.
Yeah.
We don't have a physical parklet built. We just move our marble tables in and out in the morning, moving back in at night.
Right.
So some restaurants have quite a bit more. And to be honest, I think, right from the beginning, everyone, I'll speak for myself, but I think most of the restaurants said they were okay with paying for that space out there because we knew we were getting extra revenue. We were a little shocked when they came back with the, $5 and up,
Yeah.
and everyone's happy that they lowered it. But another thing to know too is that we asked right in the beginning, where is this money going? And the answer that a lot of people don't know that I think needs to get out to the public is it's going to keep the streets cleaner. They're going to start, or they are starting their street steam cleaning and power washing sidewalks and streets weekly. It wasn't done that often. It was done, but not as much. It's going to be done much more frequently.
Yeah.
So that's a good use for the money.
Right.
And I just want the public to know that we're okay with it because it's going to something that makes sense.
Right. And I don't want to trigger pandemic memories too much here, but can you talk about how you survived, how you made it? So many restaurants went out of.
Right off the bat, we were very fortunate. It was kind of a scary time because restaurants, well, actually all businesses, middle of March 2020 had to make this huge decision based on knowing nothing. You can stay open and do takeout and delivery or close. What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
You had to make that decision like that minute. How long is it going to be? And, the answers were, well, somewhere between a week and a year. We don't know. Like nobody knew. No one knew. So you're making this huge decision that involves your entire staff and your business knowing nothing. If someone could say, it ended up being 2.5 months. And if someone could have said, it'll be 2.5 months, that would have been a much easier decision. But we had no idea. Yeah. It was just a free fall for everyone. So because we had just moved in January and we were closed for 3 weeks with the move, we weren't expecting that. Thought it would be a week. It turned into 3 weeks. When COVID hit, the last thing I wanted to do was close again and have my staff out of work. So I said, let's just give it a shot. Let's try it. Let's try takeout and delivery. And it worked well for us. I mean, our sales were about 25% of what they normally would have been, but it was something and it kept the staff there. And fortunately, about a month into COVID, I got a phone call from the Center for Successful Aging, Gary Linker, saying, hey, do you want to do this senior lunch program? It's 5 days a week. And I felt it was wonderful. It was exactly what we needed. It was what the seniors needed. It was 5 days a week to begin with. And so we packed up little brown bag hot lunches for the seniors. The agency had drivers that picked them up, and it was about 100 seniors per day for 5 days a week.
Wow.
After a few months, it tapered off to 3 days a week. But it was a great program. It lasted almost 2 years before the funding ran out. And it kept my staff busy. It was just exactly what we needed at that time. So I feel very fortunate. I know other restaurants didn't have that that fortune to have a program like that. So it was really great for us. And it
Mhm.
was great for the seniors too, because with COVID, they were so isolated and, scared to go to the grocery store and scared to walk outside. And they were very, very isolated. And so the driver showing up daily saying, "How are you doing? Here's your meal. Are you doing okay?" was really good for them. It was their only human contact for a lot of them for a long time.
Right.
So we were very fortunate. We kind of survived. People ask me, how are you with your staff? Are you shorthanded? And we were very fortunate to not go through a really rough time with that, because I think the restaurants that closed for 2.5 months with COVID, and then end of May when we could open back up, they hired their staff back. Then 6 months later, during the holidays of all times, November, December, it happened again. There was a second closure. The roller coaster ride of come back to work, don't have a job, come back to work, don't have a job. I think those are the businesses that have had a more challenging time keeping their staff. So feel very fortunate for all of that. A lot of big decisions that we've never had to make before and we'll hopefully never have to make again. But that's what COVID was. It was a planet-wide, worldwide pandemic that there's probably not one person on the planet that wasn't affected either financially or physically or emotionally. I mean, it was just kind of a crazy time. And then, there was the government funding that, in some ways during COVID, it was not easy by any means, but it was, they made it less painful. They're just, here, pay your staff. Don't worry about losing jobs. Keep your staff there, even if you don't need them, even if you're slow and have very little business, we'll help you out. So it was a process to go through. You had to show with payroll reports where the money went and that you were actually paying your employees and not buying sports cars. And so that was, kind of an interesting, crazy thing too. But we
Yeah.
went through it.
Some people did buy sports
And
cars.
not just restaurants. I mean, all businesses were offered the PPP, and it just kept things better than they could have been.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was
I
amazing.
guess that's the only way I could describe it. Better than they could have been.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the Pascucci story in a second, but before that, I want to ask you about parades. And you mentioned Solstice is coming up, and then of course Fiesta. Do you? I guess we used to have 4th of July parade downtown too. Do you have any thoughts on parades and whether somehow we could get those back on state, or are you sort of good?
I think the alternatives have worked well.
Mhm.
I'm on the Solstice board, and I think Santa Barbara Street's a good alternative.
Mhm.
I mean, in a perfect world, they would be back on State Street, but then we wouldn't have the outdoor dining. And I think weighing the two, I think the outdoor dining, I mean, they've talked about having the parklets completely 100% removable for parades, and that might be an alternative. I think if restaurants were told, you can have them all of the time, but during a parade, you'll have to move them, that would probably work. We'd much rather have them 95% of the time than not at all.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm speaking for everyone, so I don't really know, but and I don't have a physical parklet to move. I mean, you think about if you got a giant, 15 by 30 foot wooden platform, where do you don't just pick it up and move it, and where do you put it? But
Right.
that's something they've got to think about. So I think
Yeah.
they all have to be movable and take them apart and put them somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely different because you've just got chairs and tables and you pull them in and out, and some of the other places that get lots of the attention from the community are not Pascucci. No one ever complains about Pascucci's outdoor dining setup. And I want to just transition from there to you and your story. I'm from this area, and I've grown up with Pascucci always as a stable restaurant in Santa Barbara. And so, can you talk a little bit about you and how did you start this restaurant? What was your story?
We just celebrated our 30-year anniversary, which is it's hard to believe. We opened in '93, and we have a lot of loyal customers, a lot of people. It was interesting with the 30-year anniversary because we had a big promotion for 2.5 weeks, and A lot of people came in and said, it's my first time downtown since COVID. We just don't get out much, and you know, patronizing the restaurant's great. You can't just survive on the tourists in the summertime. You've got to keep your loyal local customers happy all year round. But yeah, I love my business. I am here every day. I work side by side with my employees to have a good working relationship, and to greet customers. And we just really appreciate the support from Santa Barbara, not just through the pandemic, but just for 30 years. It's restaurants are a challenging business, and you need to keep your food consistent. You need to keep your service consistent.
How is it? How did you come to even start a restaurant?
Yeah.
Can you take me back to the way, what were you doing, in 1990, 91, 92, and then all of a sudden you start Pascucci in 93. Walk me through that.
I was in retail before that, and I love to cook. I always thought it would be fun to open a restaurant. I had no idea what I was getting into. Did not work in a restaurant before opening, so it was a big learning curve to get started. First few years were very challenging. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. Lost a lot of sleep, cried a lot of tears, but it's a great. You have to love the restaurant business to be in it, because there's nothing like it. So yeah, it's
And
30 years. It's kind of a long time.
I remember Palazzo, which, and you're not affiliated with, but I mean, I just mentioned them, that they were a downtown Italian restaurant that is no longer here. You're still here. You've endured. You've been able to survive all of this time. You were on the 700 block for a while. Can you talk about what happened there, and moving and shifting to the 500 block? How that worked?
Yeah, we were in Pasano Nuevo for 25 years.
Mhm.
A smaller space behind Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf for 5 years, and then the larger space at 729. And when our lease was up 3.5 years ago, I asked the landlords if they would negotiate a new lease. Our rent was $30,000 a month. They didn't raise it. That's what it was. And they would not. Didn't even get a response from them.
5 years ago, it was $30,000 a month. Wow.
3 years ago.
3 years ago. Yeah.
And actually, it ended up being a great thing, because Nordstrom's closed 2 months later. They've been vacant for 3 years. More than that, 3.5 years. Macy's has been vacant for 5 years. So there's a shopping mall with no anchors. So had we tried to stay and pay $30,000 a month rent, we obviously definitely would not be in business.
Yeah.
So that block, unfortunately, is just not what it used to be. I mean, Nordstrom's and Macy's were a big draw, and they're both just sitting there. City's trying to figure out what to do with them. So I think they're going to put housing and offices in there.
Yeah.
Kind of heard different things. There was supposed to be a skating rink that fell through.
Yeah. Bathrooms, apparently. They needed bathrooms.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had a great stroke of luck or fortune or whatever, because the 500 block is really vibrant block for activity, restaurants, probably the most vibrant block on State Street, and you were able to find that spot, and it's working really well. You were able to maintain a lot of the same vibe at both locations. Like, it feels like when you walk into the 500 block version of Pascucci, that it's like the 700 block version of Pascucci. Mm-hmm. You kept a lot of the same decor, did you?
Yeah, a lot of people comment. They say, didn't realize you moved. It's very similar. It's got the brick walls, arches. We've got a big long marble bar, the same curtains and some of the same decor. Tried to keep it similar, and also the recessed patio too. When people walk in, we had a recessed patio at the other location. So we have outdoor dining that's covered, sheltered. You can come in the rain with your dog and not get wet. Yeah. So that's another reason people walk in and they're like, "Did you move your bathrooms?" Like, we moved the whole restaurant. So people don't always realize that we moved when they come in.
Right.
With the street being closed, they kind of lose their bearings of where they are.
And are you Italian, or why did you start an Italian restaurant?
I'm not Italian. I've taken a few trips to Italy. It's beautiful. I love it. For anyone that's never been to Italy, definitely go. It's amazing. I haven't been in quite a while, but I'm sure it hasn't changed much.
And you chose Italian restaurant. How come, as opposed to, Mexican or, any other popular foods locally?
I just fell in love with Italy when I went and thought it never worked in a restaurant, thought it would be a whole lot of fun to open a restaurant. So I really honestly did not know what I was getting into.
Yeah. And I know it hasn't been easy, but what do you think has been the key to your ability to survive for 30 years as
Well,
a
we
restaurant?
try to keep our prices fair.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate raising prices, but it's a necessary evil. It's something restaurants have to do, and food costs have been a roller coaster ride the last year plus. Um, but I think customers understand when restaurants raise their prices, because you go grocery shopping and it's sticker shock. It's like, things that you bought last week are just noticeably higher. So I think people get it. It's kind of simmering down. It's not as crazy as it was a few months ago. I mean, eggs, it was like $1 for an egg, like $1 to buy an egg, if you could find them.
Right.
Um, our chicken tripled in price about a year and a half ago. Tripled. And
Well,
you can't triple your prices. You just have to absorb that. Um, you can raise them a little bit, and people understand that, but it's just part of the cost of doing business. When food costs skyrocket, you have to try to figure out, what you're going to do. And you can only do so much with portion size. If someone comes in and they're getting a much smaller portion and they're paying twice as much, they won't come back. So what's most important is consistency and keeping your customers coming back, not just coming in once, but keep them coming back.
right. Just a couple more questions. And if you were mayor, not that the mayor has this much power, but if you were able to just make State Street exactly what you want it to be right now, snap your fingers, whether it's any of those plans we saw from MIG or your own sort of ideas, what would it look like? Do you want a lane for
Uh,
bikes? You want wide outdoor dining? What would it look like if you could just say, just do this?
I think the outdoor dining has proven that people like it, people enjoy it. I think they should keep it. Um, Possibly there might be a couple of blocks that they do open up to car traffic, maybe just one way.
Oh,
I know the bikes are an issue. I've asked at meetings, why can't they just ban the e-bikes? And for whatever reason, they say we can't do that. I do think, the reason being that they go 30 miles an hour, 28 miles an hour, and they scare people. And we want all ages, shapes, and sizes downtown. We want our senior citizens to feel comfortable crossing the street, that they're not going to be scared by some high school kid on an e-bike that's, showing off to his friends and trying to cut in front of you and run a red light. So, but again, enforcement is important too. If there's no reason to have regulations if there's no enforcement. So I just think they need to listen to what the public wants and try to figure out how to fix it and then move forward.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of voices, a lot of people,
Yeah.
a small group has a loud voice. Most of the people who have, businesses, restaurants, they may not be getting all the attention because they're not complaining, they're not griping. So it's really hard for these city leaders to kind of put this into context because people have all these different perspectives. And it's largely a generational battle too. If you're of a certain age, you think State Street should be this bike place you can just sort of go down, have a meal, glass of wine, stroll, and that's where you're at this point in your life. But 10 years, 15 years older than that, you might have kids and families, and you don't really want to have to compete with those bikes because it's a safety issue. And then the next generation, you want to, just like you said, go downtown and feel safe and not have to worry about all of this commotion. And so that's the challenge, is trying to figure out what works for everybody. And you've been one of the leaders in all of this and sort of making things happen. So I'm sure people value you and appreciate your perspective. Laura, I want to ask you, and I asked you about this when we did our audio podcast a couple of years ago. I guess it would have been 3 years ago now, because it was right when
Yep.
the beginning of the pandemic. But one of my favorite elected officials over the years was Babatunde Folayemi. And he when I was at the news press, he was, he was on the city council, but he used to talk to me. He's like, Josh, you got to come over and try my sweet potato pie. I was selling it from, Pascucci, and, Laura's letting me do it. And, he would spend a lot of time there. And, in this day of age, we have a lot of different types of elected leaders, but Babatunde was somebody who you can't really replace, and I was wondering if you could, he always spoke so fondly of you. I wonder if you could just end the podcast just talking about your memories of him and his role at Pascucci over the years.
He was an amazing man, very missed. I still talk to his wife, Akiva, from time to time. But just he did so much for this city. He got kids out of gangs and off the streets and going in a good direction. He was in a gang. He grew up in Harlem. Rough childhood, rough teenager in a gang, and he got his life on a great path and got kids realizing that they don't need that attention from a gang to get attention, that they could be a good person and have a good life. And he really was inspirational for kids that were going in a bad direction to right their life and have a better life and not go the gang direction.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember the name of it. He had an agency that was
There's a pro-youth coalition.
Pro-youth coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But he started that and he kept it going for a lot of years, and that was a really great thing. Yeah. And that name says it all, Pro-Youth Coalition. Like, we're here for you. We want to have you have a good life. We don't want you to go down this path of being a gang member. So yeah, he was an amazing
he would kind of hold court at Pascucci's. Do you remember that? Like, he'd kind of hang out in front and
I actually had him there as a host a couple nights a week. So he was doing so much volunteer work, but as we know, Santa Barbara's an expensive town to live in. So I just tried to kind of help him have a living so he could afford rent in Santa Barbara. So I had him there as a host, and he was just amazing. He'd greet people at the door. He would make his sweet potato pies and sell them. Yeah. He actually, this was back when Michael Jackson was alive, every month or two, a limo would pull up and his limo driver would run in and grab 10 pies. So that was one of his customers that loved his sweet potato pies. So yeah, and we actually, as a fundraiser for his wife's church, we had a couple of gospel brunches, and those were really fun. He made fried chicken and sweet potato pies, and we just had great food, great music. He has a few friends that are very musically talented. I don't know if you know Ron Paris.
Oh yeah.
You know Ron Paris?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, those really, really fun memories with him. Just an amazing man. Very missed. Very missed.
Very missed. Yeah. Well, I know he'd be proud of you and how you've been able to endure all these years and keep Pascucci alive for another generation, because he always spoke really highly of you. Laura, I want to thank you for the podcast and sharing your views and your thoughts on downtown and your restaurant, and sort of, talking to city leaders about what they can do. I know everyone I talk to has a great amount of respect for you and your restaurant and your work and your way of working collaboratively to find solutions and not adversarial. And it's all, you always get what you want with honey, so you're much better at that. And so I appreciate your time and sharing your story on the podcast.
The only thing I can say is, just for the local community, just if you support a local business, just patronize it. Clothing store, restaurant, just do your best to support local business. We need it. It's been a challenging 3 years, and I feel like it's still kind of challenging. We're all still going through it. So but thank you to the locals in Santa Barbara.